We are less than a week away from the start of your AFL Fantasy season for 2025. Can you believe it? Well, we will get a couple of games of footy this weekend. We're only a week out. And so we've got to ask ourselves one core question. Who are the best players in 2025? Across every single line, who is the best of the best? And that's what we're going to look at on this episode. Who do I think will be, by the end of the season, the top 6 defenders, the top 8 mids, the top 2 rucks, and the top 6 forwards? We're not going by average, we're going by total points. So players that are going to start the year with some injuries, so a Bontempelli, a Goulden, a Green, that may have normally sat in that equation space without them playing not only in the opening round or the potential first few rounds. Total points-wise, I just am not going to put them in the conversation. If you're watching this on YouTube, though, before we get really cracking, I'd love to know, who do you think is the best of the best AFL fantasy players in 2025? Comment below and let me know. These are the defenders, and then I'll walk you through who I have got. I think the best defender this year is going to be Harry Sheezel. Outstanding option. Is he going to be as big as he was last year? That's a whole different conversation. But I do think he's going to be the best scoring defender for us in 2025. He's shown across this new role in the back half of last year and through this preseason already that he has this license to roam. He scores, he gets involved in the scoreboard, he gets involved in every single capacity. And as good as our premium tier defenders are, I still think he is the best of all our defenders. I'm happy to pick him. I'm happy to start him. I'm not doing either of them, but I'd be happy to do it if I had the cash. But I still think he's the best defender to go. Is there anybody else that could do it? Yeah, there's a couple, but I think he's the number one. Who I think is going to be the number 2 best defender is Lachie Whitfield. I don't see a regression coming for him based on role or the outcomes that are around him. Health has always been the greatest obstacle that he's had to overcome, but more recently than not, he has done so. So much of the ball and this GWS ball movement funnels through him. Their defensive 6 and 7 is really tight, and the departures of Perryman and Cumming have little to no impact on him. Even with some of the guys they've experimented with in the halfback spot in this preseason, the ball's still going to funnel through their best distribution outlet, which is Lachie Whitfield. I couldn't start him for a number of different reasons, but do I think he's the second best defender this year? Yes, I do. I think the third best defender this year is going to be a Jack Sinclair. I think he's actually going to see a little bit of a bump in his scoring this year, if we can believe what we've seen so far in the preseason without having watched him play. Is it does seem like he's back into that halfback spot more permanently, and an Isaiah Wanganeen-Miller is the guy that they will use at centre bounce a little bit more, and even coming off half forward. And Sinclair is the A1 outlet coming out of this St Kilda defensive line. So I could actually see him moving his average up to sort of that 105.7 sort of range, where previously he's been sort of the low 100 component of his average. I love the way he moves the ball. I love the way he gets involved through transition and through some stoppage scoring. I think he's going to be the third best defender for us this year. The fourth best defender, who would I have at D4 by now to the end of the year? Again, going by total points, I'm going to go for Dane Zorko. I think he was perfect for us last year in every way, but as the year goes on, the Lions are about to get some significant cavalry into their backline. While it won't impact the first month or so of the year, again, I'm talking about points, not average, that we're going to see a Kitty Coleman come into this side. He is inside their best 22, as will be a Tom Doedee coming back inside this best 22. Both of these guys, while different types of players and playmakers to a Dane Zorko, is Kitty's going to absorb some of that market share of ball movement. And Tom Doedee is a phenomenal interceptor. I think because we haven't seen him play for the better part of almost 2 years, we've forgotten just how good of a player he is. I just see the volume opportunity of ball back there, just not to be as high. Still clearly a great option. I've got him as my fourth best defender, but I don't see him maintaining the rage from a seasonal average, so he's sitting in at the 4. Then I'm going to get a little interesting on you here. I think it's Jordan Clark. I think he's going to be the 5th best defender for us this year. this Fremantle ball movement that has evolved in the preseason, and we've seen glimpses of it last year from JL at the coaching team. It's fast, it's smooth, and it suits his game style beautifully. There's not as much just little lob, 35-metre kicks, 50 metres in the air, Luke Ryan, eat your heart out type of ball movement. It's a lot smoother and faster. And as a result, I can see a lot of transition scoring getting picked up here from Jordan Clark, even more than he has right now. I can see an elevated handball receive territory going up even higher than where it sits already. I want to go bold. I want to go big. I think everything is lining up nicely for a Jordan Clark. I don't think what you're going to get at who I've got at D5 being Clark versus a D8 or 9 is going to be drastically different. But I do think he's going to be the fifth best option for us from a total points perspective. And then there's a couple of unlucky names. I think Sicily could be in there. I still want to see how much that forward flip eventuates. We'll wait and see. Nazai Wanganeen-Miller is deserving of a shout through there. But I think the sixth best defender is going to be a Max Holmes. Pretty comparable scoring last year, whether he played in that half-back line or played a little bit more heavy centre bounce. But I think a combination of a few things, not only some extra support coming to the midfield and defence based on what Geelong have done with the arrival of a Bailey Smith, but also I think a combination of some natural progression and some confidence in his body and how to play through both those roles now. I can actually see him creeping over that 100 average marker for us. Again, I don't think there's going to be much of a dip between who I had Clark at 5 and say, what Nazaya I've mentioned, Sicily I've mentioned, Luke Ryan, I think he's still going to be perfectly fine. There's a bunch of names that can sit there, but they're my 6 best defenders to start the year. Sheasel, I think, is going to be the best. Again, we're talking points. Sheasel, Whitfield, Sinclair, Zorko, then Clark, then Holmes. That is who I think is going to be the 6 best scoring defenders. You want to know my mids? Let's roll you through there. Who's M1, ladies and gentlemen? Yep, Andrew Brayshaw. I think he's the best midfielder. He's the best midfielder rolling around this year. Unbelievable in all the dynamics of the game. Scores in bulk and scores in all the columns that you want. Absolute superstar. He's going to have a hot start to go with this unbelievable tear. And with what Sarong has done in the most previous season, he's very much put himself as the number 1 tag target should teams try to do any negating. For me, Brayshaw, M1, total points scorer, best mid this year. M2, Jordan Dawson. I think despite some concerns people have about just how much centre-bounce presence he's going to have, is he still going to score really, really well for us? I don't have that concern about that midfield split, and I do not see him. I feel like I've said this ad nauseum now throughout the preseason, but we'll say it once again. His volatility of role last year was due to a lack of deficiencies in the Crows' depth, which, if they are healthy, which they currently are, have all been resolved due to some health and some offline additions through the trade and free agency period. So to me, the need for the volatility of role is gone. It's now about rotations, but I still can see him knocking that 110 marker out pretty comfortably, if I'm honest. So Dawson's the second best mid, I think, this year from a total points perspective. Next up, Nick Dacos, absolute superstar of the competition. Probably would have been M2 based on total points. He's getting a slight bump, not because of how good Dawson is, although you can build that case. I wonder just how the plantar fasciitis holds up for the year. They've been a little bit quiet, other than to say he's fine now, is pretty much what Colin would have said. And he's looked it in the preseason, I've got to say that. But he is pure AFL fantasy the way he scores, gets involved in so much. And I think the arrival of both a Dan Houston and a Harry Perryman support him, with Houston bringing some ball movement and getting him some even easier uncontested ball in space, so plenty more marks that can come through that, not just the transition handball receive scoring, which we know he does so well. And then a Perryman is a defensive-focused mid who I think can use his body to protect and to block and to create shape for Dacos, that they really haven't had that in this side. So I think both of those two additions actually aid the scoring of a Nick Dacos. The 4th best mid for total points this year, I've got sitting in that spot, Zach Merritt. It is safe, it is boring, it is predictable, but it is fair and it is valid. This guy just knows how to build himself into an AFL fantasy style of game. Such a great work rate player, such a great runner, does do the hard stuff and works then to get into space to get that easier uncontested work rate stuff. Absolute superstar. Can you start him? No, you just can't, due to the way that now opening round, the loss of that game, and now really they're one game short to start the year. But from a total points perspective, it's different to a starting squad option. Still think he's going to be one of the best options for us. I've got him as the fourth best. M5 for total points, going Caleb Sarong. Yes, he fell off the cliff late last year, but I can see another hot start. And what I've loved about Caleb Sarong's preseason is probably the knock on Caleb has been he hasn't had enough other dimensions to his game, that if he's not winning the ball at a contested or stoppage situation, or if he's not tackling, he's not scoring enough. What I've loved from him is the addition of the work he's doing inside forward 50 in his rest, not just now going to the bench. And he's creating himself not only a scoring outlet and option, but creating more avenues to score AFL fantasy points. So to me, I still think he's going to be an absolute ripping pick. And I've got him as my fifth best mid for total points. My sixth, I'm going for Connor Rozee. He's a 110 mid when he's fit and when he's firing. He's an absolute superstar. I love everything about what he has been, what he has done, and what he's about to be. I just think he's absolutely elite. Yes, lock it in. M6 total points. He is an absolute start. I think the departure of Zach Butters just helps him a fraction more as well. So, yes, he should be a great option for us this year, should he stay healthy and fit. M7, underrated in the AFL fantasy community, but not by myself and not by my fellow panelist Kane. There's a deep love for Josh Dunkley. Scores in every column. The arrival and emergence of Will Ashcroft, I don't believe will hurt him at all. Dunkley is really the projection of what I think Perryman wants to be, which is the defensive-minded mid that also impacts the game with what he does offensively. Dunkley is absolutely that. Even when he's given those tagging and shutdown roles as the defensive-minded mid, he still then does the hard stuff to work off them and punish that midfielder offensively. One of the best overhead marks for all midfielders in the league. Still could probably add some goals to his game, which isn't going to happen, but he's just such an offensive weapon and a defensive scorer. Even when he's the type of player that he could be sitting on 50 AFL fantasy points at three-quarter time and then still walk away with a 110. He just scores in all those core areas that really enable accelerated scoring over a couple of minutes. I don't think Ashcroft hurts him. It'll hurt McCluggage. Just quietly, there is nobody that can replace Dunkley in this Lions team just yet. And then M8, much like the defenders, it's kind of like from 5 onwards, it could be anyone. It could be anyone sitting in this spot. You could build a case. I'm not saying it's any of these guys, but I'd hear a case for a Jack Steele. I'd hear a case for a Sam Walsh. I'd hear the case for an Isaac Heaney. With so many options out early, you could have a hot start, a Noah Anderson. I wouldn't hear it for Green, despite a slow start with no games. I wouldn't really hear that from him. But in this spot, I'm going to go a little more speculative. I'm going to go with Tim Taranto. I think he's got a fantasy scoring. In fact, I know he's got a fantasy scoring game about him. Not uber bullish on starting with him. Those first couple of games do look historically tricky. I'd rather trade into Taranto than rather start and move off him. But that's it. I really like him. There's just nobody else in that midfield that I've got any trust currency of and around at all. He is the guy. I'm happy to have him there. It's speculative, I know. But like I said, M8 through to about M14, I feel like all are going to be pretty similar and pretty comparable. My top 2 rucks, I don't think people will be too surprised by what I'm going to go here. I think the best ruck from a total points perspective this year, Max Gawn. Yeah, I'm committed to this Gawn thing. And it will be the death of me this year or absolutely the emergence of it. I've got him in my AFL fantasy team to start. I just think what he does this year, if Melbourne are any chance of winning another premiership with the phenomenal May, Lever, Gawn, Oliver, Petrarca, Viney core, it will be this year if they're going to get it done. And yes, the forward line worries me, but that only aids to the appeal of a Max Gawn. They don't have anybody else that can protect him. He is the number one option, but I do think with other tools emerging at other parts of the ground, it just means he doesn't have to always be the guy all the time. That said, to start the year, he's going to have to be, and he's got the fixture to boot. I just think he's the best ruck this year. Plain and simple. I don't see any great cause to pivot off that. R2, Cherry, and it's toit. It is real close between Gawn and Cherry. So as much as you've heard the love of Max Gawn, which I think is not only much needed and something that the community is probably shading on him a little bit in AFL Fantasy, he's been amazing for a long time. He is not that far ahead of Cherry. He's millimetres as far as I'm concerned. I think Cherry's still going to be very, very good for us this year. I think he'll actually model a pretty similar trend to what we saw last year of a slower start and then a hot stretch to end the year. I think he's going to be a great pick. I think these are the two top rucks for 2025. Sorry, Rowan Marshall. I think you're going to be dethroned. And then the forwards. Who are the best forwards? For me, I think the best forward this year, I've changed my tune. Jackson Macrae from a total points perspective. I think he's the number one guy. He's got the ceiling, he's got the role, and he's in the scoring ecosystem that favours his style of game the most. There's just something about Jackson in this spot. I don't think a 110 average is likely to go back to his glory days, but I don't see anything under 100. I really, really don't. I think he's going to be that good for us. That's how bullish I am on Jackson Macrae. The second best forward, Isaac Rankin. Yeah, again, maybe I'm extra hot on Isaac, but I think if he's got this 60-40 midfield split, I think he's going to be absolutely elite for us. He's so good in so many different areas, and he's going to add that goal scoring and not lose that as well. If he becomes that 25-touch midfielder that gets 5 tackles, 5 marks, and a shot on goal or 2 a game that turns into goals, well, there's your 105 right there. I think that probably is his limit, but I do believe, has got one of the highest scoring outcome ceilings for us of all our forwards. F3, Bailey Smith. Yep, I think he's that good. He's been my F1 for most of the preseason, but I think you just can't deny Macrae, and he and Rankin aren't far off each other, but I had to make a call. I've gone for Rankin over Smith in terms of total points. I just think that's how it's going to flat out this year. Smith's going to be a great pick for us this year, offers so much value. He's going to be brilliant. I think he's the third best forward. The fourth best forward this year, and one of the most expensive to start, is a Jason Horne-Francis. He's going to have a hot start for us this year, but he has well and truly become the tag target for opposition teams. And just given the nature of how he plays, that will either mean he plays sacrificially through the midfield, or he actually moves and plays a deeper forward element. While he's a hard matchup there, you need him in and around the ball a ton to be able to make sure he's knocking on that 100 average, which we really want and need him to be. And I think he's going to be around that marker too. I'm big on what he offers for us this year. I think he's still going to be a great pick at some point in the year. So to put him at 4, some are like, MJ, you're crazy. He's the 4th best. I didn't say how big the gap is between F1 and F4 yet. I don't think it's going to be 15 points. I think they're all going to be right around that 100 marker, and I've just got Rankin and Macrae a little bit above that, and I think Bailey Smith's going to be right on that. For what it's worth, I think Horne-Francis could be anywhere from a 95 right up to a 105 as maybe his projected peak. Caleb Daniels, my F5. He's in the role that he's been a mid-90s guy for a lot of his time at the Bulldogs. I think he's going to be just that at North Melbourne. I do wonder whether or not they add some other ball movement outlets out of defence that are just a bit more attacking than Caleb. If that comes earlier in the year than later, he might get clipped to a lower 90s rather than a mid-high 90s sort of average. I'd be surprised, but would welcome a 100 average based on what I've seen from him and how North Melbourne do play the game. But We're all on him in our classic team, so politely, it doesn't really matter outside of for draft players. And then who's the 6th best forward? Look, there's a bunch of names you could throw through this spot. Sanders really could be it, knowing that there's an expectation of a hot start, and Beveridge has shown that once a player does well in a role, he's happy to maintain them in that spot. So despite some injury absences early for a couple of their top line options, Sanders is definitely in consideration, but I'm going to, very much like a Zach Merritt, I'm just going to get on base here. I'll play it safe and I'll go with Dylan Moore. He's shown now over the last couple of years, both when Hawthorn play well and when they play poorly, he's a sort of a low 90s sort of guy. I think that's what we'll see yet again. His work rate to get up and around the ground, to get involved in the defensive and the offensive stuff of the Hawks is absolutely elite. He's not just a guy that popped late last year because Hawkball was a thing. He showed the year prior, even though when they were poor, he can still be that sort of mid to high, probably mid-90s is really the peak of what he gets. So that's my forward line, and that's who I think is the best of the best in every line for AFL Fantasy this year. Do you agree or disagree? I would love to know. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can comment below and let me know who you think are the best of the best players across every line for total points. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, make sure if you haven't already subscribed and given this a 5-star rating. If you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't followed and subscribed to the channel, come on, friend, you've got to do it. Give this video a like as well. Inside the description of this episode is all the details to get in touch with us across social media, become a Patreon, gain some extra bonus content, and support the Coaches Panel by doing so. You could also get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch while you're there. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back again with you tomorrow with another episode as we get close to the start of your fantasy footy year.